Welcome back to the Give a Care podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing my daughter, Callies Newman, who embodies the future of caregiving. Callies is a 22-year-old professional caregiver right here at the Right Choice Home Care, while simultaneously pursuing higher education and running a vibrant, creative career as a social media strategist and director in Chicago. Callies is a testament to the fact that caregiving is a field for the passionate and the driven. She actively uses her creative energy, community involvement, and deep compassion to champion for her clients. We're diving into why someone so young and creatively engaged chooses this high demanding path, how she balances multiple complex roles, and how passion translates into powerful client advocacy. Let's jump in.
Hi.
Welcome, Callies Newman, to our podcast. It's our first caregiver interview, and I'm so excited to have you on for many different reasons. One, you've been at Right Choice Home Care for a very long time. And two, I have to let the world know you are my daughter, and I'm very proud that you are a caregiver. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule, because we know how busy you are, and so we appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. So thank you for joining us on the Give a Care podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited. And yes, I've been here for a while because I had to be, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Awesome. So I'm glad that you said that. So what was the defining moment or motivation that you chose caregiving as a professional career path for you, specifically in the home care setting?
I think that's something that had developed with me over time because I started caregiving at 16 and I'm currently 22. So initially, when you have your first job, you kind of pick up anything that you can, get money with. And I believe at first I wasn't even caregiving, I was doing office work. I was doing billing and scheduling and things of that nature. So when I had started my first client, she was this very sweet old lady, and she wasn't too far from where we stayed. She was a 5-minute drive, and her daughter was very sweet to me as well. So both of them were extremely kind to me, and her daughter had always expressed her appreciation for me. But sometimes when you're caregiving, not a lot of people express that. But since that was my first client, I think that had a great impression.
So you had a good experience going into caregiving because your first client was very appreciative of, for having you. And second, they made you feel very comfortable in your transitioning from back office work to front line, I should say. It's not always, like you said, we find where a family is one, receptive to having care, and then two, showing their appreciation to having care within the home. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, correct. There have been a few times where families can get sometimes they don't like the care because they don't believe that somebody else should be there for their parent, even though
Yes.
if I'm here, obviously you need me. Obviously, there's something to be done. And that's usually sometimes a feud in between families. That's an interfamily conflict. And those are sometimes the most tense and most awkward situations to be in because that's where you will usually find a lot of those situations where you aren't being appreciated and you aren't, being treated nice.
You're absolutely right. Not everyone is receptive to care, and sometimes you have families that are rude to caregivers. So, when you start a new client, how do you quickly get up to speed on their unique care plan and make sure you don't miss a critical detail within and also so within the family dynamics?
When I have a new client, I think on top of we have client walkthroughs with the company. It's also very important to kind of learn how to read the room in a situation because sometimes you'll
Yes.
have the client who doesn't want to be taken care of, but the family really needs the help, or, vice versa, where
Correct.
the client does need the care. The client is very appreciative, but the family doesn't need the help. And when sometimes it takes a
Yes.
while to figure out those dynamics, because you might not meet the whole family on the
Hmm.
first. They might come around a few weeks later. And when you see all those family dynamics, you have to learn each person and kind of show up and become kind of a chameleon and adjust to who you're
Yeah.
around. Because there is a client where I could be, very happy. I could be, joking with them. We can laugh and we can share stories. But then there's a client who needs some seriousness, who, if it's not a serious interaction, they won't appreciate it. So sometimes that's also just a cultural difference. When you get to that point where you're working so much, you figure out how to move through certain dynamics.
Yes. So let's talk about family dynamics for a moment. And when you're caregiving, a lot of times there's different family dynamics going on. Have you ever found yourself in a situation when you're dealing with family dynamics and culture at the same time? And how have you made yourself the best caregiver that family will ever find or see? And second part of that question is, what makes you believe such a great caregiver?
To answer your question about cultural and family dynamics, I feel that sometimes we have to realize that there's a little bit of nuance in everything, and it can't be one or the other. It's always both. There's been very few times where I have met a family where the cultural dynamics and the family dynamics did not affect the situation at all. And I think that's another conversation to be had within, the Black community, where we have a lot of our frustrations out in our family, or we leave each other behind, or not as communal sometimes as we should be. But I think that's another conversation for another day. I notice with white families, they do have they interact more with their families. They visit more, they pop up more. And sometimes that's because, they're closer. Sometimes that's because, time permits. But I do notice that when it comes to working with Black families, you won't see them in the home as much to visit.
Okay. So what do you say to those people that not all Black families are the same, and you're stereotyping that all white families are interactive and that they are highly involved in their loved ones' care versus Black families who are not so involved? And I'm going to play devil's advocate because I've seen it where you have Caucasian family members that are not so involved. And then you have the African American family that are hovering or won't allow caregivers to properly do their job and give care. So I want us to be mindful that this has been your experience and we don't want to generalize or stereotype anyone. So what do you say to that?
Well, that it is my experience. That's what I have to say to that. I mean, my worldview is not anybody else's worldview. I don't have the same clients as
True.
any other people. However, when I have been working since 16 and having, I can't count the clients off the top of my head, but I've had quite a few. I will say that it's been a pretty mixed crowd of either Black or white families, maybe a few Latino families in the mix as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I noticed that sometimes as a community we can be very argumentative, but
How so?
it's never with the client. It's always with other family members, and that can create dysfunction within the household. I will not say that I haven't heard them argue while I am in the room. And I think
Okay.
that's the thing that might be a little bit different, is that those arguments and those conversations are had when company is not there, versus other times
Okay.
it really doesn't matter who's in the room. There's been times where I'm in the room helping somebody's mom, and behind me they're arguing saying, "We don't need this. We don't need this caregiver. We don't need this company." It's a very awkward situation to be in. But I notice that a lot of the times when I am in those other families' houses, I will never hear that. Even if they want to say it in front of my face, that's not something that I'll hear.
So that goes back to culture, like you stated earlier. It's the culture and then the family dynamics of it. So you have had your experience, and I have to say, I have had my experience, and I had not had those experiences being a caregiver at all. So everybody's experience is different. And I do have to reiterate to the audience that this has been your experience. So thank you for sharing your experience with us. And we appreciate having you as a caregiver. So, what is it about the right choice, home care's mission or culture that makes you stay and continue to do this challenging work every day? Because we know you've had some challenging clients.
Yes. I've had some very challenging clients, but I think that's what keeps me motivated. I'm not a big fan of what we call sitter cases. I feel like it doesn't stimulate me. It doesn't help with interaction. It makes me feel, I don't want to say useless, but that's
Okay.
how I feel when I'm doing sitter cases. When it comes to right choice, I appreciate how there's a lot of range. I'm not going to stay in the same place. I've had clients from
Mm-hmm.
all over, some in the city, some in suburbs that I have never even heard before, traveling very, very far, sometimes up to Evanston and things of that nature. I do I do enjoy that part because when you do work with so many clients from different places, you do see a different side of life. And I think that's one thing that I've
Yeah.
gained from caregiving is perspective of the older
Mm-hmm.
generation. A lot of them have lived different lives. A lot of them
Yeah.
have sometimes they have might have grown. Some of them are stuck in their ways. But it's good to see that there isn't just one option for when you get older. You have the option to change. And I think that sometimes as people, we don't realize that there's, or at least for me, I can't speak for everybody else, but sometimes for myself, there's so much more ahead of you, but I can't think about that right now. But when I do work with older people, I I make those decisions that I probably wouldn't have made before because they're constantly talking about regret or they're constantly talking about things that they wish they would have done. If I come in with I used to have a nose piercing and some people don't like it. I had a client who loved it. Every time I would come in, she would be, I just love your little piercing. She would always talk about it, but she had dementia, so she would forget that I have it. Always used to mention it and say that she liked it. So with those things, with those perspectives, you learn that some things are not oddities. What is seen as the normal opinion on something sometimes isn't that. So
Yeah.
we're working with
Yeah.
right choice. I've appreciated being taken in different areas and different walks of life because sometimes when you work in places like these, sometimes you're in a nursing home or sometimes you're in a hospital. Sometimes you stay with the same client for your entire life. And it's
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately when I move on from clients, it's usually because of a passing. So I
Yeah.
don't stay with them for as long as I want to, but I've learned to enjoy life and enjoy death. I've learned to
Mm.
not fear death anymore. I've learned
Mm-hmm.
death is a process for the living. And
Yeah.
also working with families, you see how the process of dying makes things so emotional. So, there's these irrational decisions sometimes. And I remember I had a client I was working with actually pretty recently, maybe about last year. Very sweet lady. She was in transition. She was on hospice. And I think, luckily, I've never been on the clock while anybody has passed away. But she did die maybe about 2 days after my shift. But her best friend who was taking care of her, she was some type of spiritual coach. And she wasn't, just like everybody else in the family who was crying every day or feeling the need to put their energy on her, if that makes sense. Because I've learned that death is pretty, it can be very exhausting for the person that is dying. It's exhausting for the person that is dying, and exhausting for the family as well. But when you're in that stage where you're transitioning, being around a lot of people can really take the energy out of them.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Yes.
Best friend was just explaining that she knows she's going to be okay, and that since she has all of these people in life appreciating her, how death would look, and she's not worried about her transition. So I think meeting people like that, or meeting people who are not so worried about the financials, or the house and the lease and who's getting this and who's getting that, they learn to appreciate and work with what's happening in front of them, staying present. And I think a lot of the time that when we are dealing with death, we don't know how to really stay present in the moment. We're thinking about all the things that can happen in the future of what happens when this person is gone. And let's worry about that when we get there, which is a lot easier said than done. Because though there are those situations of bills and house and who gets this and who gets what. But I think there's a time and a place. You can't argue at somebody's deathbed about that. And I've seen that quite a few times.
We're talking today with Callies Newman, who is navigating the caregiving world while balancing higher education, creative directing, and social strategy. If you are balancing multiple roles, career, family, and caregiving, and need a framework that understands the strategy and the heart behind it, join our free newsletter. I'll send you essential tips and guidance, including key takeaways from conversation like this one, right in your inbox. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Join the Give a Care LinkedIn group to network with professionals and caregivers who are building systems and supporting their communities just like Callies. All the links to access these supportive spaces are waiting for you in the show notes. I see you, and you're not alone. Let's get back to our conversation with Callies. That's something I haven't heard from you before, but I'm glad that we're having this conversation, open conversation, that I'm learning a lot more about your experience. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about client advocacy. Since you see the client every day, you are truly their voice. So what does it look like on a practical level when you have to fight for a client and advocate for change that you know is necessary for their well-being? So if you could give us an example where you advocated for a client and their well-being, and we know that it's necessary, and not all caregivers care, and that label of caregiver where people are just going into caregiving and saying, oh, well, I'm a caregiver, and not understanding that it's truly advocating. And I know that's a loaded question along with some statements, but can you share with us what advocating for a client looks like for you?
I would say that I have been lucky enough to not have to fight for any client rights. I've had clients whose families were involved quite a bit, or if they weren't involved, they were cognitive enough to make their own decisions. And here and there, like, there's always helpful suggestions that I could make, but I've never had to stress about a problem.
Okay, fair enough. So dealing with clients who have difficult behaviors or who are resistant to care is common. What is your go-to communication technique for de-escalating a situation and building trust when a client is pushing back? Earlier, you talked about family dynamics and culture. and you've had where families would, argue in front of you and things like that. So how do you, if you've had a difficult client, talk about one that you've had?
Quite a few difficult clients. A lot of the time, if they are difficult, that's because of cognitive issues such as dementia or Alzheimer's.
Mm.
So it's not
Okay. Okay.
really your fault. And I think that's something that has to be constantly reminded that it's not really something that they control. It's not something that is their fault. And it's just currently
Mm-hmm.
their reality. Well, I'm not really a fussy person. I'm not going to stress out, certain situations. For the most times I'm very calm about things. So I don't when it comes to clients, I also try to be aware and just put that energy onto them of being calm and
Mm-hmm.
collected. Even if I'm in a very stressed state of mind, I can't show that because that's not only if they're cognitive enough, that's going to put them in a situation to where that's going to make them more stressed out. And if they're having, an
Yeah.
episode or something along those lines, I need to be on my toes because you never know what happens. I had a situation one time where this lady was throwing shoes at me. It's funny to think about it now, but she really was upset at me for something that she had imagined in her mind. And
Mm-hmm.
I just really had to quite literally walk around her, keep my distance. But sometimes that's the best that you can do. You can keep your distance. You
Mm-hmm.
don't, try to poke at them. You don't try to agitate them to make the situation worse for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I can say that I've never been injured on the job, by a
Mm-hmm.
client. Or, I've
Mm-hmm.
probably been fussed at a few times, yelled at. But again, this is not really a lot of times in those instances, they aren't themselves. They're just currently living their reality, which is dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So, how do you manage and deal with difficult family members who might question your methods or add stress to the client's home environment? And I know you addressed that early on, but could you give us an example of how you deal with difficult family members? And again, we're talking about family dynamics and culture, and all of that can play a role in how families behave towards caregivers.
When I'm dealing with a difficult family member, I don't argue. Everything that they say is correct because that alleviates a lot of stress on my end. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to go back and forth with you about something, especially if it's not anything to do with the client, which most of the time is really has nothing to
Okay.
do with the client.
Mm-hmm.
It's never my mom did this, you didn't do this for my mom. It's never that. It's always just some
Mm-hmm.
underlying feeling of we don't need you in the first place. But you're
Okay.
never really saying that my mom doesn't need care. At the end of the day, I believe it's a financial issue. It's a
Okay.
financial issue.
Okay.
People feel they are spending a lot of money on a service.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't really know how to de-escalate those situations because I just
Mm-hmm.
like to say, I am here to help. I'm here to help. Or sometimes
Right.
I don't say anything at all because I just like there are some people who just like to hear themselves talk, and that is okay. So I don't bother with these people. I don't like
Okay.
nonsense.
Okay. And I do know that about you. So let's talk about managing multiple clients and self care, because I know, being your mom, you take self care very seriously. In fact, even being your mom, you'll tell me, Mom, I need to take care of myself. I can't do this. I can't do that. When I'm asking, well, sometimes I don't think I'm asking much, but hey, I'm the mom, right? But I appreciate that you do take time out for yourself. So how do you, or what is your statement or phrase that you'd like to give to other caregivers who are not able to take care of themselves or don't feel that they have the time to do self care, especially if they're managing multiple clients?
When you're managing multiple clients or a caregiver in general, self-care is one of the most important things that you can deal with and make sure that you have, because you are constantly being put in a state where you are seeing people decline. You are constantly being
Yeah.
put in a state where you are seeing people die. And even though for me, I'm kind of numb to that at this point. I remember losing my first client. I was so sad. And she passed away while I was in college, so I couldn't even do anything about it. I couldn't visit the family. I know they were very appreciative of me, but my thing is that life goes on. Mental health is extremely important, and I cannot stress that enough, even though some people have their own beliefs on therapy and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
believe in therapy. Having somebody to talk to about your day really does help. Even today, when I came home and I was just very stressed about my client and what was happening with him, I sat down with my partner, we talked about it, and I felt a lot better. But sometimes, you don't have anybody to talk to, and
Mm-hmm.
you should really push for taking time to yourself. There was a point in time where I had so much overtime, and there were times where I take the CTA, I take the train. So where somebody can take 30 minutes in the car, it might take me an hour and a half. There have been times
Mm-hmm.
I've taken a job that I'm traveling 3 hours to work and back.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's not something that I'm necessarily complaining about, because that's where the hours are. I'm trying to work at the end of the day. But maybe at that time, I shouldn't have put so much stress on myself, because it did cause some issues. It did cause some decline. And even working when I was still in the house, sometimes if somebody called off, because, I'm directly related, if it doesn't matter if it's 11 p.m. and I'm working, you're going to wake me up and say, hey, somebody called off. So things like that well, not everybody's going to get called at 12 a.m. in the morning to fill in, but it does happen. It does
Yeah,
happen.
it does happen. And having you being there and being accessible, really meant that the client wasn't going to go without care, because one of the things about Right Choice Home Care is that we don't leave our clients without care. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I've seen you all stress about filling a shift, no matter how quick the shift is, no long the shift is. If it's almost over, somebody's going to fill that shift, whether it be you, somebody in the office who doesn't usually is on the front line anymore, as you would say, and somebody who isn't even dealing with clients that personally anymore. But I would say, if you do not have the mental capacity to do that, don't. One thing about stress is that it affects everything. So
Mhm.
physically, over time, you'll start to wear.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
agree.
another thing. Taking care of, just like being active, walking, things like that. That's something that I'm also telling myself right now, that I need to be more active as a caregiver, because sometimes when you're hands on, you're just waiting for somebody to do something. You're just waiting for the client to have something to do. And I work 12-hour shifts. So that's a lot of time of waiting for a client to do something sometimes. And if the space is small, you can only do so much to keep yourself busy. So taking the time to take care of not only your physical health as well as your mental health is extremely important, in my opinion, especially if you're lifting clients, if you're rolling them, if you're moving them in any type of way.
Okay. So, what's your secret to energy management then? I know you talked about walking and some other things. So, do you have a secret to energy management?
Nope. I just run off vibes. I really do. Sometimes I don't even get enough sleep, and that's just me and my body not agreeing with my schedule. So I'll get off work, I'll try my best to go to sleep, and it just doesn't happen, because my body's like, well, it's the daytime.
Hmm.
Sometimes, energy management can be difficult. I love a good green tea. a good matcha latte that gets me. Sometimes a sugary snack will help a little bit.
Hmm.
So that's my secret to energy levels.
Okay, well, you just answered the next question I was going to have for you. How do you organize your work week to make sure that you have enough left in the tank to be fully present to every client? And you just gave it to me. You sometimes put sugar in your tank. Everyone is not going to do the same thing. I used to miss workouts when I had to work overnights and my body wouldn't adjust to, because I would be awake also during the day, because it's like your body's like, oh, nope, sorry, it's daytime. It's time to get moving around. So for people who are looking for different techniques to manage their work week, you mentioned, having therapy, having someone to talk to. What else would you recommend?
To help with keeping the balance between your work and personal life,
Mm-hmm.
more the energy side of it, it just really
Mm-hmm.
depends on how you are as a person. Sometimes for me, the best end to my work, well, it used to be hanging out with my friends was the best end to my work week. I would always
Mm-hmm.
try to hang out with somebody just because they bring me, love and light. But as
Mm-hmm.
recently, I've become a little more antisocial, so I like to stay home and hide in my room. So sometimes it just really depends on the type of person you are. If you like to go out at the end of the week, you have something to do, then okay. If you want to hide in your room, that's great too. I personally, I've done both. As of recently, I've been traveling a lot lately. So
Mm-hmm.
I've come to find myself in a little bit of a tabanka where I'll go on vacation and I come back and I'm just the saddest person because I'm back to reality.
Mm.
I don't if not everybody can afford to go on vacation, sometimes even a home vacation is good for you, a nice 3-day weekend to just kind of reset yourself. Because I do believe that we do need to reset ourselves every now and
Yeah,
then.
have some downtime.
It's very
Yeah.
important.
Okay, so what is the most fulfilling part of your job? The moment or interaction that reminds you of why you continue to dedicate yourself to a caregiving career.
The most fulfilling part of my job, and I talked about this in the beginning, is just getting that appreciation and acknowledgement at the end of the day. Praise goes a long way, I feel, especially if it's something that you don't necessarily hear in your daily life. But there
Mm-hmm.
are people who are very appreciative of you taking care of their mom or their dad or their grandma or their
Mm-hmm.
they make it known. I've gotten plenty of gifts in the past and plenty of notes
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
cards for people that I've taken care of. And I have some on the desk that I
Okay.
go around and try to find them. I have a whole envelope of just notes and cards and things that I've received in the past. And some of it is just, friends, family, things of that nature. But I have more. I just don't know where they are at the moment. But yeah, even like receiving things like that, really does.
And I know we don't go around looking for clients to give us gifts, but it always used to amaze me when the client would buy you a gift. And I'm thinking, this should be the other way around. You should be buying the client a gift. Why are they showering you with gifts? It always boggled my mind. Like, wait a minute, she should be buying them gifts, but I saw that a lot.
Because
Explain yourself, young lady.
Because I'm a nice person. At the end of the day, I do think that I can't speak for anybody. I can only speak for myself, and I say this in
Uh-huh.
the humblest way that I can. I really do strive to be a decent human being, and I think
Mm-hmm.
people lack that. There is such thing as a bedside manner where you can't just come into work angry and fussy and all of those things just because you
Mm-hmm.
had a bad day. I had to learn how to turn off my frustration at my personal life and take care of it at work. And sometimes I'm not a perfect person. Sometimes, the it did slip. Sometimes, my personal life did slip into my work life. But
Mm.
for the most part, I've always tried to be nice. I always tried to be caring. And I won't even say try because it's just a natural thing for my person. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I could say that people give me notes and gifts and things of that nature. Because I think people see authenticity.
Yeah, I love that. So, for a young person considering caregiving as a career, what is the single most important piece of advice you would give them about sustaining passion, avoiding burnout in this field?
That's something when it comes to younger people joining the caregiving field and joining the healthcare field in general, it's always something to think about and really take the time to decide if that's something that you really want to do, because not everybody
Mm-hmm.
is set out for it. And even sometimes I'll go in an Uber and sometimes I'll talk to somebody along the street and they'll say, "Oh, what do you do for work?" And I'll say, "I'm a caregiver." And they'll make a face and say, "Oh, I can never do that. Oh, you have such a strong
Mm-hmm.
soul." All these other things of just, they're kind of, what is the word? They're kind of backhanded compliments in a way. Because they'll be like, "Wow, you're such a strong person." I'm just like,
Uh-huh.
"Okay." I guess, thank you for that. But no, you do have to have some type of will. You have to have some type of understanding and learn to process things differently. If you're an
Yeah,
anxious person, you can't be anxious on the job. And if you're
yeah.
somebody who gets easily stressed out, this is honestly not something for you. Or
Mm-hmm.
find an alternative of finding a way to relieve your stress. But at the end of the day, there's so much. Caregiving is always something so unexpected. Sometimes I'll walk into work and I'll just be like, "Why did this happen? Why this doesn't so and how did this happen?" But that's the thing, when you're dealing with people, people aren't one note. They aren't the
Yeah,
same. People do
yeah,
different things every day. And especially
yeah.
if you're dealing with somebody, who has some type of mental ailment, a mental illness, whether it be bipolar disorder or um, dementia or Alzheimer's or any of those things, sometimes that's just something that you have to prepare yourself for.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you say to those people that are caregivers and just go to work and sit and do nothing and don't interact with the client?
Don't do it anymore. If you are a caregiver who is not interacting with the client, just don't do it anymore. Because
Yeah.
to me, I don't think there's a client that I've had where I don't know much about. Unless,
Mm.
I couldn't talk to them because, they were declining. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
at their best anymore. But there are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of clients over time where, I've talked to them about many different things. And that's also why the perspective that I have, because when you talk to older people who do sometimes live their life in regret, or
Uh-huh.
sometimes they give you advice, and I've gotten great advice from older people. And the advice is always do what makes you happy, because a lot of the time they just didn't do what made them happy. They're 70
Mm.
wishing that they did certain things here and there. So if you're not willing to learn from your client, you're not willing to talk to them or interact with them, just don't do it. Don't do the job.
Yeah. So, two more questions for you. One, what is it like working with mom?
Working with my mother can be extremely stressful at times because she is my mother. And I don't think there is anybody in this world whose mom doesn't stress them out just a bit. However, I will say that because I work with my mom, I think there is less defending of my character that needs to be done, because you know how I am as a person. So if somebody says something negatively about me, which has been very rare from clients, but if someone has said something negatively about me, a quick move to a different location or just even a one-on-one talking, saying this is what you need to do to make sure that this client feels better about this situation, or even just getting one-on-one experience. I will say that I have worked almost every type of job when it comes to caregiving at this point. I have worked with many different devices. Some devices were newer to me. And since I started when I was 16, it wasn't something that I felt like I just jumped into. It's a learning thing. It's a sponge interaction that's happening. I will say that there's more hands-on experience, even though it can be stressful at times. Because like I said, being woken up at 12 a.m. because somebody else called off is not a fun experience. It's not a fun experience for anybody. But, you know, it has its pros and cons. And I think the pro is that there is a legacy to build behind. There's an understanding of why things need to be done the way that need to be done, because at the end of the day, who's going to understand you better than your family? Sometimes that's a statement that can be argued, but who could as well as your family?
Okay. So, lastly, how do you give a care?
How do I give a care?
Mm-hmm.
By constantly showing up to work the best that I can and always trying to help or always trying to improve who I am as a person or for the client. Because at the end of the day, when I go into work, I'm not working for myself. I'm working for somebody else, and somebody does need me to fulfill their day. So that is how I give it care.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Callies Newman, for joining us on the Give a Care podcast. Could you tell our audience how they can find you as a caregiver if they're considering Right Choice Home Care and Callies Newman as one of their caregivers?
Well, to contact me, you're going to need to go through the agency. If you want me as a caregiver, rightchoicehomecare.com. I also can be contacted through the social media websites, Instagram and Facebook on Right Choice, because I also take care of the social media. So if you DM, I will see it personally. Outside of that, my Instagram is controversial, CNTRVRSL_. And that you can decide if you want to do on your own, because my name is controversial for a reason. I do talk about touchy subjects.
Thank you, Callies.
Thank you.
The takeaway here is clear. Caregiving is a field that requires and rewards high-level energy, creativity, and deep compassion. Here are your 2 next steps. Find your fuel. If you're feeling burnt out, identify one passion project or community activity, just like Callies' creative directing or shelter work, that can recharge your well-being. Support the mission. If this episode inspired you to see the professional power in caregiving, please subscribe to the Give a Care podcast. Let us know what you loved about Callies' story by leaving a review. Thank you for choosing to lead with passion and purpose. We'll talk soon.